I'm extremely pleased to have our next guest. Ido Aharoni he serves as a global distinguished professor at NYU's Program of International Relations in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. He was ambassador, the longest serving ambassador from Israel in New York. And he is a 25-year-old veteran of Israel's Foreign Service, a public diplomacy specialist, founder of the Brand Israel program, and a well-known nation branding practitioner. Ambassador Aharoni, who served as Israel's longest-serving consul general, oversaw the operations of Israel's largest diplomatic mission worldwide. Ido, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We were just discussing off the air what we wanted to talk about today, and I think that there's a lot of people in our audience who have questions about the way that Israel is fighting this current conflict. And I let you know off the air as well that my nephew is part of the fight and that his own personal attitude has changed dramatically from a few years ago when he was very willing to see the other side of the conflict, where he would say, you know, I understand why young men are angry. I get it. His heart is hardened, and this has hardened the hearts of a lot of people, I think, in Israel. Is this conflict different, and if so, how?
Oh, yeah, this is a different level. This is even, from a philosophical point of view, what Hamas did this time is something that even the Nazis did not allow themselves to do, which is to document the atrocities, to document how enthusiastically they were engaged in them and gleefully, and then to distribute them, sometimes using the platforms and the devices of the victims themselves. So this is something that even the Nazis did not do. The Nazis were trying to hide their crimes. We don't have footage of Jews dying in the gas chambers. And, of course, the answer to the question as to why they did that is because they wanted to instill this basic fear in all of us. Not just Jews in Israel and Jews in America, but Westerners, people that believe in the Western set of values. They wanted to instill fear in all of us. You're not safe. Global jihad is after you. You are the infidel. This is the first purpose. And then the second was to strip us of our own humanity. They want to bring us down to their level of pre-civilizational behavior. And, of course, it's a struggle because when you're angry and emotions are raging, people are, beginning to talk about revenge and so on. And it's very difficult to make sure that we don't lose our own humanity. And I'm glad to say that so far we have not. Israel didn't lose its own humanity. You don't see Israeli soldiers raping Palestinian women. You don't see Israeli soldiers killing babies in Gaza. Of course, there is collateral damage, just as there was collateral damage when the U.S. invaded Iraq, or when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, or when the Allied forces bombed Dresden, or when the U.S. bombed Japan to end World War II. In all those cases, hundreds of thousands of people died. But the Israeli Defense Forces, they never do that as a matter of policy. And that's the big difference. So, yes, this is different.
I was having a conversation with a friend. I actually got very frustrated with the conversation and cut it short because the friend actually said, Israel just needs to pack it in. They're never going to be able to live in peace in Israel. They need to all the Jews just need to go somewhere else. And I said to my friend, do you think they're going to be finished then? Do you really think this is just about Israel? Because I don't believe it is.
Right. I think you're right. And there's a reason why Emmanuel Macron showed up in Israel shortly after the war started, because he remembers what happened in Nice. He remembers what happened in Charlie Hebdo. He remembered what happened in the theater in Paris. And they know, all the European countries know, all the New Yorkers know. I was in New York on 9/11. We know. And, of course, it's unbearable to hear people that say, well, there are two sides to the conflict. No, there are no two sides to the conflict. Let me explain. There's only one side, and that side is called humanity. And those people are interested in the history of the conflict should be aware of the fact that the Palestinians have rejected every and any proposal that was put forth by either the British, the League of Nations back in the day, 1937, the United Nations, 1947, Bill Clinton's plan, 2008, Condoleezza Rice, 2008. They rejected every compromise that was ever proposed to them. And more than that, our listeners should know, Israel left Gaza. When people talk about occupation, when people talk about genocide, it's all baloney. Israel left Gaza in the summer of 2008 until the last square inch. Gaza was given to the Palestinians for themselves to rule and to turn Gaza into something that looks more like Singapore rather than what it looks like today. But they chose. It's their decision. And by the way, and we don't buy this argument that the Palestinians were not aware of what Hamas is doing. The Palestinians voted Hamas into power. The Palestinians of the Gaza Strip support Hamas. You could see some of the footage that unfortunately I had the duty of watching before I came on the speaking tour. But you can see thousands of Palestinians mutilating dead bodies. These are not Hamas terrorists. These are rank-and-file Gazans participating in the atrocities. We don't know where many of the hostages are because they were abducted by private people, put in private homes, being treated as property. We have an abundance of evidence about raping women time and again. Unfortunately, most of the victims of those rapes did not survive. They died. And so we will never be able to hear from them what happened to them. But we have eyewitnesses. We have Israeli academics, interestingly, a group of female academics in Israel from the best universities in Israel now working as a task force to collect all the evidence that they have about the mass raping of women. And we have evidence, and we're going to build a case for the International Court on this issue. So these are just examples of what people should know when they talk about this conflict, and that this is why it's so different.
I have been reading some of the information coming out now that hostages have been released, and some of it is absolutely heartbreaking, that you have little children who are afraid to make noise because they were threatened at gunpoint while they were being held captive. And now, I mean, what is their life going to be now? That's the kind of trauma that we can't possibly understand, most of us. And you have people who are out there, to make your point about moral equivalencies, that are trying to do a whataboutism thing. And you're like, wait a minute, Israel hasn't kidnapped children and threatened them at gunpoint when they are making a noise as a scared child. I mean, some of the stuff that's happening that we're hearing now is absolutely horrific. But do you have any hope that it will be covered fairly and that the rest of the world will hear these stories that I'm reading? Because I read certain news outlets. I read the Jerusalem Post. I read, Haaretz. I read these outlets that are reporting it, but I'm not seeing it in the New York Times.
Right. And you will not see them. And I'll tell you why. This whole thing coincides with something much larger that is happening in the United States. And that is, of course, the rise of the social justice movement. And the social justice movement adopted this binary view of reality. The world is divided between victims and victimizers, oppressors and oppressed. And Israel and American Jews find themselves on the wrong side of all of those issues. In their worldview, if you are oppressed, if you are the underdog, you are by definition right. Everything that you will say or do is justified. And, we, for a while, lived under the illusion that maybe those young people that are demonstrating from the river to the sea, maybe they don't understand what they really say. Maybe they don't understand that they're supporting Hamas, a designated terrorist organization by the United States. And by the way, and if they're on a foreign student visa, they should know their visa can be revoked easily just because they are chanting from the river to the sea. They're violating the terms of their visa. But I'm setting this aside. We thought maybe they really don't understand what they're saying. They don't know what Hamas is all about. But we're discovering, much to our amazement and dismay, that they know exactly what Hamas is all about, and they think it's justified. In their binary worldview, life is a constant struggle between good and evil. If you're not with me, you're by definition evil, and evil has to be eradicated. And I saw a video of a young American girl saying that those 360 young souls that went to the music festival to dance in celebration of peace, they deserve to die. She said it. They deserve to die. It's like, can you imagine me as an Israeli diplomat coming to America after 9/11, telling you on your show, Mandy, come on, we had it coming. We had it coming.
It's laughable. I mean, it's horrible, but it's laughable at the same time. I have to ask, Ido, because I know that this question is going to be coming on my text line. American Jews have long been supporters of those same social justice movements. And I think that is creating a real sort of feedback situation now that is probably really troubling for a lot of American Jews. Have you spoken to any American Jews that you have to feel betrayed in a way?
Well, American Jews, by and large, support the Democratic Party. You will find very few American Jews, usually in academia, the intellectuals, that find intellectual justifications for everything. For example, for queers for Palestine, they can justify that.
Which is absurd.
But the vast majority of American Jews do not support the Democratic Party of AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. No, they don't. They support the Democratic Party of the mainstream, of Bill Clinton and that kind of legacy. And in many ways, they're still voting for FDR, as the cliche goes. And I think it's true because they felt as a minority, and the new type of anti-Semitism that we're seeing today is unique because for the first time, the Jews are not being viewed as the evil other, but rather as the establishment. And the populist voices are targeting the Jews not because they are the other. In other words, the Jews, in the name of inclusion, Mandy, in the name of inclusion, the Jews are being excluded. They're being excluded from universities. They're being excluded from the court system. They're being excluded from politics. And there is a big push, again, in the social justice movement to represented mostly by BLM, to push the Jews back into their enclaves. And that is because they view the world as a struggle about power.
Right.
It's the best example, perhaps the most sophisticated piece of anti-Semitism that I've heard recently was the famous Dave Chappelle monologue on Saturday Night Live, which was a few months ago, in which he said more or less the following implicitly. It's about power. The Jews have had the power for far too long, which by itself is an anti-Semitic statement. Now it's our turn. That's basically that's the underlying assumption. You've had it, now it's our turn.
Right.
And we're going to push you out. Even imagine they did a museum about the history of Hollywood. And the Jews were excluded from the history of Hollywood, the people that created Hollywood.
Yeah.
And you see that in the way they make decisions about casting movies these days. You see that in the way they do, this whole culture of diversity and inclusion in corporate America. And I must say that if the Jewish community will not push back, this is going to end very badly for them.
I want to ask about the attacks of October 7th because Susan Witkin, who's in the studio right now, I'm going to make her say hi in a minute, mentioned that during your comments to the Jewish National Convention that's happening right now in downtown, you mentioned that there was intelligence about these attacks. And the New York Times reported today that Israel has now said, well, we thought it was an aspirational type thing, but there's more to that story.
Right. So we will know more, obviously, after things will be investigated. The failure was on both levels, the political level. So the idea, led mostly by Prime Minister Netanyahu, since he returned to the Prime Minister's office in 2009, that Hamas could somehow be contained.
Right.
And that it's easier and more beneficial for Israel from a policy standpoint to deal with Hamas rather than negotiate the two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority. And that meant in practice strengthening Hamas indirectly and weakening the Palestinian Authority. And that, of course, was a colossal failure on a policy level, and Mr. Netanyahu will have to answer some tough questions when the investigation will begin.
Do you think that's because he was distracted with all of the other sort of political nonsense that was going on? And I say nonsense, but the judicial overhaul he was trying to shove through and some of the other more controversial positions that he took.
I think Mr. Netanyahu forgot why he's there.
Right.
He forgot that he's there to protect us, not to protect himself.
I told a friend of mine, I think he knows he's done politically after this. It's over after this. Look, therefore, that's why he will fight and make sure that Hamas is eliminated, because he knows that's his only legacy.
Well, I hope he succeeds, but we will talk about that. I don't think that the United States is going to give him the leeway to complete the job. I don't think that we will be able to eradicate Hamas military capacity or Hezbollah, which is what we should do. We should actually, if there's one thing that we learned from 10/7, is that we cannot live with a genocidal jihadist organization along our borders, not in the south and not in the north. And therefore, Israel must proactively take out Hamas and take out Hezbollah. But we need the United States. We need the United States to provide us with the weapons, with the ammunition, and with the diplomatic umbrella. I don't see the current administration going into election year doing that. In fact, President Biden, who started very strongly, only the other day said that the United States is interested in, not resuming.
Longer ceasefire.
Yeah, longer ceasefire, which is a horrible mistake from a tactical point of view. But as I said, there's a political failure, but then there's a military failure. The military failure must be investigated. We have to understand what happened. We have circumstantial evidence that link both Russia and Iran to what happened on the 7th. We saw some preparation already. I can tell you again, I don't have any evidence, but on October 5th, an army of avatars shows up, extremely proficient avatars, highly sophisticated. Their conduct is it's like a page from the Soviet playbook of psychological warfare. And mysteriously,
They just showed up out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere, tens of them, of avatars, and thousands of bots on October 5th. And I sat with Israeli cybersecurity analysts that showed it to me and showed me how those avatars behave and how they connect. They're so good, the avatars, that they managed to recruit rank and file ordinary Israelis to start Facebook discussions. So the avatars actually created real groups. These are not real people, but they were able to create, that's how good they are. And so it's certainly not Hamas behind it. And
Too
of course,
sophisticated for
too
Hamas.
sophisticated for Hamas to do it, and certainly not 2 days before the attack.
Right.
Now, we have information that their military goal was far more ambitious. We have thousands of rifles that they brought with them, tens of thousands of cartridges. So we know that the plan was far more ambitious. We have the actual plan in our hands, and we can analyze it. And so we know that it's all circumstantial at this point, but there's no doubt in my mind we will find the smoking gun. Also, let us remember that days after the war broke out, a leadership of Hamas visited Moscow. It doesn't happen by coincidence.
Right.
And this is all part of a much larger effort by the anti-American axis to undermine the dominance of the United States. And I think that President Biden was fully aware of it when he decided to come to Israel 10 days after the war broke out.
I asked off the air also, this conflict, the way that this conflict is unfurling, how much influence do other nations around the world have on Israel and how they execute this war? Because I truly believe that Benjamin Netanyahu knows he's done, and that his only way of saving face or saving grace or being respected by the people of Israel is to go scorched earth and annihilate the Hamas leadership, the capabilities. So how much influence is there coming from the outside, and how much does it matter?
It matters. It matters because of two reasons. First of all, Israelis are hypersensitive to what the world is saying. I think it's a mistake. My entire career, I was trying to fix that. But that's the way it is. Israelis are hypersensitive. And maybe the reason is because Israel indirectly was born out of a resolution made by the international community, right? So November 29th, 1947, the partition plan was a vote by the United Nations. That's really the source of the legitimacy for Israel's creation. That's the first reason. The second reason is because we are pretty much dependent upon the goodwill of the Americans. And without the Americans, we are a sitting duck, diplomatically, politically, and militarily. And the danger is that one day will be an administration that will not view Israel as an asset, but rather as a burden. And that's a real fear. And that's another failure of the Israeli leadership. They failed us in that too. We were supposed to be able to protect ourselves without the help of President Biden sending aircraft carriers and threatening the Lebanese and the Iranians. But we were failed by our leadership in that department too, pretty badly. And things will have to change. And Israel will have to restructure its army so that our army is built and designed to fight longer wars of attrition. Right now, the Israeli army is designed to fight 3-4 weeks max. These kind of wars belong to the, to the past.
Yeah.
In the future, we need to take into consideration that Tel Aviv and Haifa will be the front lines.
Oh, that's so heartbreaking.
And that heavy precision missiles will hit Israeli energy hubs and Israeli airports and Israeli military bases and so on. And we need to be prepared for that. And we did not prepare for this war well, and we're paying the price for it.
Ido Aharoni is my guest. We are out of time. I know you have to go back and speak as well, but I will definitely, we will be in contact again, and we'll have you on the show again. Fascinating conversation. One thing I would say, and if you put this into the ear of whomever, Israel needs to get better at public relations. They need to take the Chinese tip from the Confucius Institute. People are so ignorant of the history of the region. They're so ignorant of the history of the conflict. They're so ignorant of everything that Israel's got to do that PR, man. They gotta get out there and start educating people, because they're not learning it in our schools. And Hamas is the master of creating a scene that they want to garner sympathy. And it is infuriating to me that they use their citizens and it works. And that's what's so frustrating.
Yeah, well, they have the advantage of being perceived as the underdog.
Right.
As I said, when the worldview is binary, black and white, good versus evil, victims versus victimizers, they have a built-in advantage,
right,
which we don't.
Ido Aharoni, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.